Biden is unfortunately continuing his long established pattern of terrible foreign policy related rhetoric and actions. This time it has to do with Bolivia, which had just overcome a US led coup. And that coup, of course, overthrew Evo Morales, who had won the election. There was no question he won the election. Even reporters who seem to be complicit in this coup admitted that he won. It's just that he didn't win by a large enough margin, which makes absolutely no sense. But with that said, Biden officials seem to be pretty salty about the coup leader's arrest. So when Evo Morales was essentially exiled, the person who ended up taking charge was not second in line in the election. It was a woman named Janine Áñez, who then not only proceeded to serve as the leader of this coup, she also proceeded to carry out brutal acts against indigenous Bolivians and also any of the supporters of Evo Morales. As many as 8 people were killed as a result. So what's interesting is that the Biden administration doesn't agree with the fact that she's been arrested. I would argue, I wouldn't agree with her decision to remain in the country as if she did nothing wrong. Like what? So before I get to more details, Nando, I know you've been covering this. I wanted to get some of your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the most remarkable chutzpah you could ever imagine, right? They're expressing grave concerns over the human rights of Janine Áñez just because she's being held in a totally kind of humane prison. I mean, certainly compared to the prisons in the United States. While they investigate whether this was a crimes that are worth convicting for a large length of time. I mean, in the United States, people get thrown in jail all the time before they see trial, and sometimes even for over a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes as long as 3 years. They're in jail before they get a trial. But of course, we have to moralize about the human rights, supposed human rights violations in a country in which we, if not actively participated, certainly gave political cover to a right-wing military coup, which led to untold death and destruction. I mean, really, we won't really know how many people died as a result of the sort of counter protests and protests that happened in the wake of the coup, the repressions from the state, the unleashing of police officers and the armed forces on innocent protesters and things like that. So. Yeah, I mean, it is just utterly shameful. It's outrageous. It's really like the meddling of the United States inside the judicial affairs of a legitimately democratically elected government. I mean, no one. The elections in Bolivia are not disputed by anyone at this point. This is not even the most. Yeah,
including the reporters who had seemed to back up the coup in their reporting previously, right? Just regurgitating talking points from the Organization of American States, which is the organization that alleged that there was like voter fraud taking place. The Washington Post actually reported that the OAS was wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then they proceeded to publish an op-ed, the editorial board did, with this: the Biden administration should lead a regional effort to preserve democracy or democratic stability in this long-suffering country, lest crisis turn into catastrophe. What?
Democratic stability is such a tell. I mean, it's just, where was that outrage when they led the coup in the first place? I mean, this is just, I mean, there was an election after the right-wing coup happened, and in which Luis Arce won, and there is not a single ounce of doubt on that election result. I mean, obviously, like the election result that Evo Morales won in beforehand, also there should be no doubt, but there was stuff in the press. So you can imagine, like, even if we're granting them that, which we should not, in this new round, there are no doubts. So this is just pure and unadulterated meddling inside the affairs of a country that has democratically elected its government and has every right in the world to decide how and when and in what way to prosecute the criminals that aided and abetted a right-wing military coup. Like there's no place for the United States, given the judicial system we have in this country, where we put more people in jail than anyone else, where we torture people by putting them in solitary confinement, torture according to the Geneva Conventions, where we have trials without prisoners without trials in Guantanamo forever and with no hope of a trial or anything like that. For us to then be moralizing about the judicial processes of a democratically elected government is absolute lunacy. Should be no one should take this seriously, not even a little bit. It's none of these paeans to human rights have any sort of standing in any way. So it's absolutely insane that the Biden administration is pursuing this line through Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who has adopted a pose towards Latin America that is indistinguishable, obviously, from Trump's, indistinguishable really from any American president in the last several decades, in which we have the right to pick and choose the leaders of countries in Latin America, not the Latin American people themselves. We choose, and if we don't like it, we do whatever it takes to put the guy we do like.
Well, Anthony Blinken did release a statement about this as well. And so US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in a statement that there are questions about the legality of the arrests and urged Bolivia to release the detainees pending an independent and transparent inquiry into human rights and due process concerns, which again, like when you're so right, when you take a step back and you look at the context of human rights abuses and the illegality of police actions, for instance. I mean, we're currently experiencing the Derek Chauvin trial in real time, and there's no comment about that. But there's a comment about the authorities in Bolivia deciding, I think correctly, to detain the leader of a right-wing coup in their country, and someone who was incredibly brutal to supporters of Evo Morales and protesters in the wake of the coup, as you mentioned. And luckily, they were able to come together and overcome that coup. And luckily, they did have a democratic election. But I do want to note that Janine Áñez did everything in her power to prevent that election from happening. She kept delaying the election. And there's no comment from Anthony Blinken about that. And I would venture to say, this is just my speculation, that this is exactly why you don't nominate think tank people like Anthony Blinken. He created a think tank after the Obama administration, which was heavily funded by defense contractors. That's why you don't want that type of corruption in the White House. And for anyone who was like, come on, why are you complaining about this? Trump's finally out of office. No, well, Trump might be out of office, but as Noam Chomsky shared recently, there's really no difference between Trump's foreign policy and Biden's foreign policy so far. And that's an issue. That's a huge issue that we need to be honest about.
Yeah, I mean, liberals always get mad at the left when they say like, oh, you guys say that the two parties are the same. There are some differences between the party, but between the two parties. But in the realm of foreign policy, even a grotesque figure like Trump is just par for the course of US longstanding US policy. One of which, for example, is the absolute impunity which the United States ascribes to itself when it comes to international law. The United States, for example, does not recognize the authority of the International Criminal Court over its own citizens. But it does recognize that authority on the citizens of other people. The United States does not recognize the authority of the Geneva Conventions over its own actions, but it does really, love to say like, oh, this is a human rights violation to other countries it doesn't like. So the absolute the United States acting with impunity in foreign affairs is a 100% bipartisan consensus. There is no challenging that within the two-party structure. Zero, not one person who is like within the power structures of either party would ever challenge those totems of consensus of the US foreign policy. The consensus of empire is Democrat, it's Republican, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And just quickly going back to the editorial board over at the Washington Post, they mentioned the importance of preserving democratic stability. I want them to take a good hard look at what the result of the American version of democratic stability looks like at the border, really. Because the meddling that the United States is engaged in, the US-backed coups that the United States has implemented in many Latin American countries has led to that crisis at the border. And I know some people have issues with referring to it as a crisis, but it is a crisis. It's a crisis when you have parents who are so desperate to get their children to safety that they will literally allow for them to travel in this treacherous journey to the United States because that's literally the only option they think they have. Okay, and that's not because, well, maybe these governments just don't know what they're doing. No, the United States has gone in. The United States has overthrown democratically elected leaders. I mean, there's a long history of that. And when we're talking about Guatemala, again, US-led coup in the 1950s, all of this stuff has consequences, guys. And that's why it's important that anytime there are discussions about solutions to immigration, just simply saying like, maybe we need to build more facilities. No, that's not the solution. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to put monitoring anklets on them. Stop thinking about Band-Aids, okay? Take a step back and think about how our actions in other countries have led to what we're experiencing right now. We're just not honest about it. And I think that's really the heart of this immigration problem. And also one other thing, let's keep it real. Republicans don't really do anything about immigration. Democrats don't really do anything about immigration because they're addicted to the cheap labor. They might pretend otherwise, but I'm not buying it. They're bought off by their corporate donors. That's all they care about. And their corporate donors love the cheap labor.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.